Welcome to the Body Smart Book Club, where we talk about the best of what we read. Today we're going over pages 129 to 149 in Training for the Uphill Athlete, and we're going to be talking about returning to training after a break. I'm Melody, we got Preston with us and Mark with us, and we're excited for this episode today. So we'll just jump right in here. First of all, before we get started, does anyone have any fun stories from this week, from training, or anything you want to bring up?
Should have thought of this. I've
been kind of like a break week, so I don't have a whole lot going on right now. I'm the
same. Yeah, I'm like hardly doing anything, I feel like.
Yeah. I'm just not as amazing of an athlete as you guys, so I'm just kind of like always...
Heart rate variability.
Oh, yeah. Tell us
about that.
Yeah.
So heart rate variability. So we talked about it on the podcast a couple weeks ago. We've mentioned it a couple times within this podcast. The last book that we did, Primal Endurance, we talked about it a little bit there. So I started doing that a couple days ago. I was listening to a podcast and the guy was talking about how he uses it. And I was like, well, it might be interesting to kind of try that out. So download an app. I've been doing it for a whole 2 days. So I'm doing above average, by the way. So I think it could be a really interesting metric to track. So kind of the idea behind it, we've discussed before, is seeing how. So we want our heart rate to be more variable, right? We've talked about how when we're kind of in a sympathetically driven state, there's less variation between heartbeats, right? It's just kind of very bum, 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 bum. And so just like a lot of sympathetic activation is kind of long-term chronic sympathetic activation, right? We associate with high levels of stress, sometimes depression, anxiety, things like that. And so it can be kind of an interesting marker of where we're at, like physiologically, right? Like how our body systems are working together. Are we kind of in a ramped up fight or flight state more often? Or are we more in that kind of parasympathetic state, right? The rest and digest. How are we managing the stresses? How are we managing the training? How are we managing all the things in our life? And how does that play into how we can perform in multiple areas of our life? And so, start tracking. I think it'll be a fun thing. You can kind of see like, okay, I didn't sleep as well last night. How does that affect that? Or I ate really poorly yesterday, or I'm just feeling really fatigued, or, is an illness coming on? And you can kind of play with some of those different things and see what has an effect or what doesn't have an effect. And you can kind of modulate those activities and see if you can kind of bring that number up, right? That increase that variability, which is kind of a marker for how sympathetically or not sympathetically driven am I at any given moment. Is that decent overview?
No, that's awesome. You should keep us updated on what you learn as you check that.
Unless I start to fall really way below everyone, and then I've just forgotten to do it lately. Weird. I think my phone broke or something. Yeah. No, I think it'll be interesting. So keep you updated. And,
you just downloaded an app, right? And then you use like a chest strap.
Yeah. So that's really nice. So there's definitely people are like, oh, you got to use my heart rate app or this one, right? That are like, pay $10.99. But this one is, this one's called Elite HRV. It's one of the big free ones out there. Really simple interface, really easy to use. And then again, most chest straps it'll work with. As far as I'm aware, this one doesn't pair specifically with smartwatches or smartphones. But most of your common your common chest straps, so your Polar, your Garmin, I think like Wahoo Ticker, it'll integrate with all of those, and so a pretty accessible technology that I think has can show some really interesting things. So
I think it has a lot to play with kind of what we're talking about today too.
That ties in perfect.
Transition there.
Perfect.
Nice. We're talking about returning to training after a break, whether that be through fatigue or illness, or just needing a mental break. There's always that time where you're going to be paying a lot of attention to your body and trying to judge, how much is too much and how much isn't enough. Trying to avoid that overtraining syndrome, which is also a big topic for today. And heart variability can help measure that, a way to kind of grade your body where you're at with lots of different factors mixed in there.
Yeah, for sure. So like Preston said, talking about returning training after a break. And so a break could mean lots of things like injury, illness. Maybe it's a break that you planned. And the book talks about, before it dives into everything, that the most important thing we can learn from these setbacks is to just get up, keep moving, and just move forward from where you are right now and learn from the setback. So
yeah, and along that, like recognizing that setbacks are going to come, right? That doesn't necessarily mean it's
part of being an athlete.
Part of being an athlete, and that doesn't mean it's going to be a huge setback that's going to put you back weeks. We'll kind of talk about some of the things that will do that, but just recognizing that they will happen. And being okay with that, right? Recognizing that they're going to occur, but then doing things that we can actively to minimize those setbacks. And so, again, like we've talked about before, it's definitely not a cookie cutter approach, right? What works for one person might not work for another, and vice versa. But there are some solid principles that can help us to get back to training after those breaks, and that can help us to really avoid some of those major setbacks that really derail our training long term.
Exactly. So let's jump into some of the things that might call for a break. So in the book, it says fatigue is usually the number one reason a break is needed. And it explains that if you're tired, the best thing to do is to take a step back and reduce the duration of your workouts by 50% for a couple of days. Once you do that and you feel a little bit better, then you reduce the workout just by 75% until you're feeling a little bit better, and then you're performing at 100% again. And I liked that kind of metric of measuring that.
Well, I think it's something that's like really simple, that's easy to implement, and people can try, right? Maybe you find for yourself that you only have to take a day off, or maybe you only need to drop it down to 75%, or maybe you need to drop it down to 25%. But just kind of those general guidelines, I think, is a really good way to first give yourself a break, help you to kind of reset, and then not charge into the same mistake over again, right?
Exactly.
Which is really important, right? It just, let's have some time to reset, let's have some time to recover, and let's do it in a healthy way, so that we don't move from setback to setback, from over fatigue to over fatigue.
Exactly.
And we got to have a different mindset around that fatigue. I think too many people see it as being weak if you take a step back from that training, that mental perspective that we have towards it. And this will come into play more when we get into more talking about overtraining syndrome. But fatigue is a way for our body to, it's a sign that, we need to back off a little bit when it's excessive. Obviously, the small demands we put on the demands that we put on our body will ultimately be a way for it to grow stronger, and it's necessary to have that fatigue or the little breakdowns in your muscle. But when you start to get that excessive fatigue where you're just tired all the time, you have to take multiple naps in a day, no matter how much sleep you get at night, you're always tired, you're eating way more than you normally do. Those are signs that maybe you're kind of riding that line of having issues with fatigue or overtraining syndrome.
I love that. And also another note is, if you're tired, take 1 or 2 days off instead of pushing through it and blowing your entire season. Or maybe you get an injury and you're off for months or years. Just be good and take a couple of days off.
Yeah. And this is a concept that really we're going to keep with it, and it's kind of stayed the course throughout all the episodes that we've recorded, is the idea of recovery, right? How important recovery is, and specifically sleep. Like, we've talked about sleep so many different times in so many different ways. And we're going to keep harping on it because it's integral to recovery and it's integral to performance. One of the things, and I think we discussed it last time, and the book discussed it, is this idea of that you're not getting stronger in the gym. You're not getting stronger on the track. You're getting stronger during recovery, right? We overreach, right? We go into some of that fatigue to, get our body out of that kind of its comfortable set zone and say, hey, we need to make some adaptations. And then allowing the time for recovery through sleep, and then through other activities that help us recover. And that's where those adaptations occur. That's where that growth occurs. And so if you're neglecting sleep, then you're really neglecting your performance. If you're neglecting sleep, then you really are neglecting your training. It's just to neglect that recovery, to neglect that sleep is just a huge mistake. And I think it's too easy to make because where can I make up time? I don't know where to make it up in my day. I guess I'll make it up in my night. And that really ends up shortchanging us in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I always tell my athletes to choose sleep first before your workout. If you get home late and you didn't get your workout in that day, go to sleep. Don't try to fit your workout in. If you're not getting enough sleep, your workouts are completely pointless, I think. So, I feel like that sounded kind of harsh.
There it is.
But it's true. Okay. Next one. Next one is illness. A lot of times we have to stop because we're sick. And here's the thing. If you start to feel an illness coming on, stop. Take a break. Because what happens is there's this chart in the book called compulsion to train, and it just kind of gives this example of an athlete who's getting a cold who tries to work through it. So they get a cold, they back off a little bit, but then the next day they push it too hard, and because they push it too hard, they're feeling a little bit more sick, so they take a couple days a little bit slower, but then they want to go have fun with friends, so they go on a big fun run with friends, and they get super sick, and then by the end of these 2 weeks, they have bronchial infection. So the thing is, just if you're sick, stop. Don't be one of those people that's like, oh, it's just a sniffle. I can work through it. I can exercise it off. Just take care of yourself and stop. It's okay to take a few days off. And I love what he says in this book is take an easy day for every day you didn't train when you were sick. So if you're down sick for 3 days, take 3 easy days to come back. I feel like that's a good way to measure that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great rule of thumb. Again, kind of talking about that compulsion to train, right? When we don't take time off for illness, often it will escalate, right? What could have been a couple days off getting over a cold, right? It gets more serious and you're dealing with, bronchial irritation or a bronchial infection or something like that. You kind of hear the common phrase, if we don't take time to be well, we'll surely take time to be ill. And I think that really proves out in this thing. And so recognizing that our body has a finite set of resources. Certainly we can tap into those pretty deep, depending on what the activity is, or, it's a race day. We dive down into that willpower well and we pull something up to kind of get a PR or finish strong. But if there's nothing in that well to give, right?
Willpower won't do anything.
Yeah, we probably won't do anything. Exactly. And so, recognize that the body does have that finite set of resources. And when we feel an illness coming on, the best thing is to allow the body to devote all the resources that it can to getting well. And again, including that with good nutrition, proper hydration, adequate sleep, so that we really give ourselves the best set of tools to get better quickly. Because in the long run, yes, it stinks to take some days off of training, right? Oh man, I was sick for 3 days and now I have to take 3 days off training. Mindset wise, that can be really awful, right? No, I've got to get this in, and this is how I planned it. And I planned it down to the second, and dang it if I'm not going to meet that plan. But being okay with taking some time off now so that we don't just have this huge stretch of time later on, or even just a really prolonged kind of middle period. I don't even have words for it.
Yeah.
But just this,
I feel like that describes it perfectly.
this yuck that we're just kind of plowing through. Instead, let's take the time off. Let's deal with it, and let's give ourselves time and resources to get well.
Yeah. The book goes into further talking about when you are working out, especially with long duration workouts or high intensity workouts, that you are suppressing your immune system, especially for the hour following that workout. And so making sure that you take that into account when you, especially, thinking about when we're sick and things like that, it's just going to slow down the process of getting better. And then as well, when we're not sick, taking care of our bodies by really paying attention to the things we're exposed to in that hour after we work out, it could be another way to help avoid having to take time off because of illness. It mentions, especially in the wintertime, if you're running in the snow or the cold, that immediately after your run, you change clothes and getting something dry and warm. Because of how
don't look at any doorknobs.
Yeah, don't look at any doorknobs. Don't eat your food off the ground.
5-second rule, though, right? Isn't that? No.
Yes. And if we just take that seriously, hopefully we'll negate the amount of time we'll have to take off due to illness and be able to skip getting that yearly flu or cold or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it was really interesting. I was actually I had a moment with myself. Sounds kind of weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I was just thinking, like, lately I've been trying to be a lot better with my sleep, right? Make sure that it's more consistent. And then just like taking time for myself, right? To like taking some time to meditate, taking time to plan out my day, just kind of being more intentional with my days, trying to make sure that I'm doing things like getting enough water throughout the day, that I'm just trying to eat better in general, right? Get some more fruits and veggies in there, cut out some of the sugar.
Can we just round of applause for Mark taking care of himself?
Stop! You made me blush. But recognizing how, like, doing that, like, there's been a couple, like, you'll wake up and your throat's maybe like a little dry and you're like, oh, there's something coming on, but like nothing's like run its course, right? Like I ended up feeling fine, and just I feel like, especially this time of the year, like it's just like, oh man, here's another cold, here's another cold, and like not having that happen this year has been really cool. And so I think those principles really play out, right? Like I'm not going from cold to cold, or from just feeling like, oh, I'm just always feeling fatigued or whatever. And so I think just those principles in my own life have really played out, and trying to be, again, more intentional about including those things or not including certain things has been really helpful, from just like, I feel for myself, a health and wellness perspective.
That's awesome. That's great that you are figuring out a healthy balance for yourself. And I actually want to share a personal experience too this week. I messed up. So,
dun, dun, dun.
I just finished my 100-mile race a couple weeks ago. And right after my race, I was on these antibiotics and I had this horrible allergic reaction and I broke out in hives. And it was horrible because I couldn't sleep. So I never really got to I didn't get to sleep the next night after my 100-mile race. So I went 40 hours with no sleep, and then I couldn't sleep for 3 more days because of these hives, and I was just so sick and so yucky. And so I was like, okay, I'm trying to return to running after a break, right? And after some sickness, and I kind of took last week off. I didn't do a lot. I tried to, get up and move once an hour, but I didn't really do any workouts. And on Monday this week, I was just super excited to get out and run again. I was like, okay, I took my week off. I can run again. I'm going to be right where I was right before I ran my 100. And so I went out, and it was 80 degrees, a lot cooler than it has been, but still really hot. Yeah. Plus we got this, smoke in the air, and that's really yucky. And I just was excited to run. So I went out and I was like, I'm going to do a big run today. So my plan was to go for 2 hours. And so I get out and I just, take off. And I'm so happy. I literally am started running, my headphones were in, and I just smile because I'm I'm so happy that I'm running right now. But after about 15 minutes, I was like, crap, I am not ready to do this. My body doesn't feel good. But I ignored that feeling and I just pushed it anyways. And it was nice to get out and run, but anyways, I'm feeling it now. I've been really fatigued this week. I can't get out of bed in the morning. I'm feeling slightly sick, and I just know that I messed up, and now it's going to take a little bit longer for me to come back after this break. So anyways, I messed up. Listen to those feelings. It's okay to slow down during a run or turn around early during a run. So
yeah. But I think what's cool there is even though you maybe behaved in the way that you wouldn't necessarily love to, like having that moment of self-reflection. I think that can be as important. Definitely like train right recovery, but like being able to sit down, have that self-reflection moment, and then learn from that and kind of be able to reframe choices going forward, I think is really important, versus like, I'll figure it out in the future, right? Like,
right.
Even though you might have kind of stopped yourself later than you would have liked to, like at least you had that moment of reflection, like, oh, hey, like maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should give myself a break. And I think that's really cool, right? Because like none of us are going to be 100% great at following these concepts all the time, as much as we would love to be, right? Like, oh man, I'm Superman and I am never fatigued because I always, right? So the thing is, like, it can happen to any of us. It's going to happen to you, right? But don't just fall off, right? Like, don't let that mistake just totally derail things. Be like, okay, I did that. I can do it differently next time. And here we're going to go forward. I think what happens so often is that we just get into this kind of cycle of beating ourselves up, and that demotivates us to do things in the future. And it just ends up being kind of this vicious downward cycle, versus if we can kind of stop, have that moment of reflection, think about what we're doing, and make a different choice.
And then fix it. Thanks for making me feel better.
Yeah, well, that's, in a way, like the whole premise behind working out, like, they have these guidelines and teachings that, they've found through lots of studying and lots of tests and things like that work, for the human population as a whole. But for each of us individually, there's lots of different variations that we may respond to better or worse than others. And so ultimately it comes down to us choosing, making a choice, do I do a long run today, or do I do an easy run, or do a speed workout, whatever's going on. And ultimately that reflection backwards is how we eventually grow, because we're able to really, in hindsight, be able to see whether that was a good decision or not a good decision. Because I think all of us in the moment are going to make the best decision that we know or can make in that instance.
Yeah.
And so I've had several instances as well, just like you, where you do a workout and then later on you look back and it's so clear. Like, you're just like, okay, this was not what I should have done that day. That was really bad.
Yeah.
But going forward, that's something to incorporate and be able to personalize all these teachings that we've learned from these books and from our personal experiences, to be able to adapt a training plan better for yourself.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
Mic drop right there. That was awesome.
Peace out. It's true. We just learn and we move on, and I guess a combination of the good experience and the bad experiences that build us as athletes, right?
Yeah.
So
there was one more point with the planned breaks in training.
Oh, yes.
When,
thank you.
that I really liked. So planned breaks, you're talking about, things just come up in life, whether you're going on vacation, you don't have time to work out, you have a really busy week at work, you have, I don't know, whatever it is. We all have different instances where our training becomes less of a priority. And it talks about how ways that we can still utilize that and make it effective is by using the week prior or the time prior to that time off that's going to be planned off and maybe going a little bit harder than you typically would. And using that as your, break week, because, obviously our training, we don't want it all to be just linear upwards. It's kind of a progression of, we're going to get harder and harder and harder and then a little bit easier. And so kind of planning that week that life's can be crazy, and having that be one of those easier weeks that's more of a recovery week is a great way to keep our training moving and at the same time be able to lower our stress during some of those weeks that things are going to be crazy.
Yeah. Well, I love that idea too. When I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, like it's so simple, but it makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. And to be able to kind of, because like when those breaks come, right, whether it's vacation or something comes up or any of those things, like it's really easy to beat ourselves up and be like, oh man, like I know all of this, but I should, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of shoulding all over yourself, right? But a really great way to mitigate that and be like, no, like this is planned. I've done this with my training and I'm here, right? I can still have some light, easy workouts and stay active, but like I can use this time to rest and recover. And then it just works great. It's built right into that training plan. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that was a really important point that they spoke to in the book.
And that also is important. I'm thinking about like family vacations or doing things with your friends, and that's when maybe you plan to take a break. And that just brings the point of the importance of spending time with your friends and family for your mental health too, and not just being so obsessed with your training and spending your entire family vacation running and not even being with your family, so that's awesome. All right, so moving into our next point. So overtraining syndrome, we've talked a little bit about this. The book talks about how as an athlete, you're always kind of teetering on the edge of being the best athlete you can be and also overtraining. So the trick is to train as much as you can without overtraining, right? It also talks about if you're worried about overtraining, it's better to be a little bit undertrained than it is to overtrain. So if you're worried about pushing a little bit too hard, it's better to err on the side of caution and back off a little bit.
Yeah.
Even when you see that with like competitions, I mean, think about coming into a race. If you're a little bit overtrained, you're a little bit overcooked, you're gonna feel pretty terrible through the entire event. You'll be tired, you won't be able to perform to the level you're able to. But if you're a little bit undertrained, at least you'll feel fresh and you can have a positive outlook going into the race, knowing that you are going to feel fresh, you're going to be okay, you're going to be able to push a little bit harder, and you're not going to have that residual fatigue built up in your body that's just going to give you kind of a negative mindset throughout the race, because you're going to be feeling that fatigue that you normally wouldn't feel till later in the race at the beginning of the race.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this is like just this discussion about overtraining, I think, is a really important discussion to have because of that kind of like that really driven willpower, perseverance mindset that the endurance athletes have, which is really a good thing, right? Like,
well, it's important. You can't be an athlete without that, right?
You like legitimately can't, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's looking at two sides of the same coin, right? It can be a strength in helping you to reach your best and hit those PRs and kind of dig deep within yourself and experience that growth over time. But then on the other side, right, when it comes at the cost of your health, that's when it becomes a weakness. And the really, I guess, insidious part about overtraining is that, like, even though you're doing the same work that would normally cause adaptations to occur, either they're not occurring or you're, like maybe things are starting to break down, right? Whether it's like mentally or you're having some physical breakdown. Often we see kind of one of the ways that overtraining plays out is into an overuse injury, right? Whether that's kind of the Achilles tendonitis or runner's knee, right? So many different things, but really a sign that the body is not adapting in the way that we intended with the training loads that we're placing on it. And so it just ends up being really counterproductive and can be even harmful when we continue to train in that overtrained state. And I'm careful about using that word harmful because it gets thrown away far too much in the medical term, and it gets people really fearful about movement, about fragility. And so I'm really hesitant to use that. But from a physiological perspective and long-term effects, overtraining can be dangerous, right? It can send us into areas, and we don't want to be moving from injury to injury, right? That's when it becomes harmful. And so, like I said, I'm really careful about using that language, but it's really important to pay attention to our body, to listen to those signs, and be able to back off so that we're not, that we don't have something that really just like takes us out long term, or just really sets back our progress, or effects that end up bleeding into other areas of our life.
Yeah, no, that's. I feel like you put that really well. I just want to go over the symptoms really quick of being overtrained. So some of the symptoms are, and I thought this was interesting, you brought up that a lot of these symptoms are similar to like anxiety and depression. So the symptoms are like persistent, long-term, deep fatigue. So there's a difference between waking up in the morning and feeling kind of tired, which most of us probably do. And there's a difference and waking up in the morning and just feeling like I could fall back asleep for 8 more hours, right?
We've all had those days, I think.
Oh yeah, that's how I felt this whole week.
Yeah.
So prolonged elevated cortisol levels, so just high anxiety, also lowered testosterone levels. I didn't know that. Decreased heart rate variability, irritability, depression, weight loss.
You can get amenorrhea, which is really
Yeah.
so that's especially for female, well, only for female athletes, especially for right, but that can be really dangerous, right? That's one of the things that plays into the female athlete triad, right, where you end up having some really major problems, and it can just kind of snowball into something much more overblown. And so like it's a serious sign. Yeah.
It is. I've actually in like telling other female friends about me training for the Sotomala race, I've had multiple girls say, don't you know, like sometimes female athletes stop having their periods when you train like that? And like that is just has come up a lot. Like that's a really big concern for a lot of people. But if you're taking care of yourself, you're fine. Another one is insomnia, so you're not sleeping, lowered libido, and loss of enthusiasm and motivation. So basically, if you're feeling really tired and depressed, you're probably overtraining.
And so this is the interesting, right? Because of that overlap with some of the things that we see with anxiety and depression, is that can be a dangerous thing, right? Because there is really good research that that regular exercise can boost cognitive function, can boost mood, solid research base. But the problem is, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really down. I'm going to go out and I'm going to run more, right? I'm going to keep working out. I'm going to work out harder. I'm still not feeling good, right? And so we're using something like, and so again, it can run into like a really cruddy area, right? Like, here's what research shows me, and like this is a good thing, right? So I'm going to get more of a good thing, and in this case, it really isn't, right? It's going to kind of lead down into that downward spiral, and so, obviously, if like exercise is kind of a mood stabilizer or mood lifter, like that's great, that's awesome, but I guess if that's something that you're usually experiencing, right? Like, when I go out and run or when I go out and do this, like I tend to feel a lot better, right? It helps to, like modulate my mood throughout the day. But then you notice that's just not happening, and you keep exercising and that's not happening, and keep exercising, right? Like those can be good clues to be like, maybe I'm getting into overtraining. Maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe I need to look at things.
Recognize these things early on too is huge in trying to prevent any of these things becoming a habit or something you do too often, because it's not black and white with any of these symptoms.
Right.
There's obviously a progression from being totally fine to having a full-on depressed state from overtraining, and recognizing that early and be able to correct it early is going to diminish the amount of time you're going to have to take off due to this overtraining, and ultimately get you back to your normal self quicker than if you ignore the signs early on. So even if it is just like a little bit, you feel like a little bit off, pay attention to that, at least note it, put it in your workout journal, your training log, so that you can look back and kind of see, this is the point where things started to trend this way, or these are the workouts I did prior to that may have put me into this overtrained state. So you can use that information in the future to be able to come up with a better approach to your training and be able to handle that better in the future.
I like that, because if you mess up, it's not pointless if you keep track of it and learn from it, right? So
yeah. So it's interesting that point kind of makes me think of one of the athlete stories, right? I guess not so much messing up, but just like having difficult circumstances arise.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Which I thought was really cool, right? And so what they were talking about is just enduring a lot of actually ended up seeking out some really difficult training environments to be able to improve. And instead of just being like, oh my gosh, I was out and it was awful outside and it was muddy and blah, 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 right? It was like, well, man, I had to learn to run when I don't have as good traction, and that'll be better in this case, right? So being able to take even really negative experiences and accentuate the positive. That's not saying that we ignore that life is difficult and that we have difficult experiences. It's not shoving emotions under the rug, but it's recognizing that even in the midst of really challenging times, we can find things to accentuate and shift that mindset so that we can learn something from it.
I love that. So you're talking about the Jared Campbell story,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I highlighted a few things here. He said, to be a mountain athlete is to be comfortable with rapidly shifting situations. And then later he said, when confronted with dramatic or stressful life events, I find I'm able to remain calm and measured. And I just thought that's so cool that he's able to use the experiences he's had on the trail in his real life and just keep calm and measured when things are crazy and changing. And also shout out to this guy who has finished the Barkley Marathons 3 times. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
What
Wow.
a feat.
That is a feat. That is a feat.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I think that's a great story, and that's awesome how he can take those experiences and apply them to real life like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, like just that running is not just a thing that we do, it's very much a lifestyle, and we can take lessons from the road and put them into our lives, and it can affect not just our training, but like personal relationships, right? Like these are things that he learned out on the trail, and he's like, anytime that I'm having a difficult time, it helps me remain calm and centered, and that's so cool, right? Like our mindset can affect running, and running can affect our mindset, and I think it's a really cool way for it to come full circle.
Oh yeah, running is a great way to learn about life. One thing, coming back to overtraining syndrome, I just wanted to point this out. I thought this was really interesting that in the book it talks about how this goes undiagnosed, and a lot of doctors will think you're a hypochondriac and you don't really understand overtraining until you've experienced it yourself. So just another throw out that it's important to know your body and understand when you're getting close to overtraining so you can avoid it. It really comes down to you taking care of yourself.
Definitely.
Because it is kind of hard to notice.
Yeah, and I think, again, Preston pointed out a really important thing, right? Keeping some type of journal, right? Workout journal or mood journal or, something like that allows you to track that, because those symptoms are so common to so many different things, right? It's kind of a constellation of symptoms that you could, pull out of several different, disorders or illnesses or et cetera, et cetera. And so I think being able to kind of mark those symptoms alongside what's occurring in your training, what's occurring in your personal life, right? What's occurring with sleep and other stressors can really help to kind of zone in and give a good snapshot of where you're at, and maybe help to clarify some of those symptoms in the context of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump into, sorry, did you have something?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Let's jump into periodization. So we talk about periodization here, and this is important to know in avoiding overtraining syndrome. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Mark?
So really, the concept of periodization, it's been around for a while. Started with back in the day, more so I think the 60s, but it was with Soviet scientists. It was more in the strength training realm, from what I understand, is kind of where it first grew out of. But really applicable to strength training, really applicable to running, really to any form of exercise that we're doing, because it's designed to help us adapt without moving from plateau to plateau. Right, kind of like we were talking about earlier. I think one of the really common things that happens when we decide to train for anything, especially novice athletes, is oh, I got to shoot for the moon, and it's just got to be constantly upward. And then, oh my gosh, I got here, and then why is nothing changing? And I'm still running, and nothing's right. And so this allows us to build in enough changing stimulus to adapt, but also allowing for recovery. So the typical periodization model that we see, really simple, is kind of, you start at this level, we go up, up, and then back down, and then up, 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 and back down, something like that. So there's that constant trend upward, but you're giving your body little breaks. And during each of those cycles and throughout the whole cycle, you're building in different training stimuli at different times to work on different trainable aspects of the sport, whether it's running, whether it's skimo, whether it's weightlifting, any of those things. And so it's really just a way to best use the body's natural processes of adaptation in a scheduled way, let's call it.
So he talks about 4 different periods in periodization. So there's the transition period, the base period, the pre-competition period, and then the competition period. And I guess just a brief overview of what these are. So your transition period is a 2 to 8 week period, kind of like what we're in right now.
Perfect example!
With trying to get back into running. So it's kind of your transition period between a really big event or maybe an illness or injury. And then you have your base period, which is, a few months where you're doing a lot of aerobic work, trying to get in more hours, more time on your feet, more mileage. Then you come into pre-competition period where you start to incorporate more utilization training, so more race-specific training, more high-intensity training. And then you get into your competition period where it's like, okay, you got a competition every other weekend, and now you're trying to balance competitions and capacity training and trying to maintain what you've already built. And I want to ask you, because I'm not as familiar with this, because for me it's like one big race a year. I don't race every weekend. So how do you balance that?
It's interesting because, so in school I studied exercise science, exercise physiology, things like that. And at the same time I was competing on Weber State's cross country and track team. And so from what I learned in classes, I'd kind of like analyze the different workouts our coaches would give us. And it was funny to be able to look at these different, training phases and be able to see distinct changes in what was happening within our training in real life, and have it kind of match what we were learning in school. It was really reassuring to be able to see it used in a real life setting and be able to see results from it. And so a typical, distance runner's training macro cycle, so like throughout a full year, we'll typically start in like the fall time with cross country, and it'll go all the way through December. And then December up till March, you have indoor track, and then March out to June, you have outdoor track, and then you start your base phase for the next year coming up. So it really is a full year thing. And so it can be difficult to manage that. And so when I was looking at it, we would start that transition phase, early June, be able to start doing things really just to prepare us to strengthen our body, get ready for the next year long of races. There's a lot coming up there. So, things like strength work, that resistance band work, strengthening different muscles that we may have had issues with in the past year to try and really bulletproof our legs for the next training cycle that we have going on. Once we're finished with that, which that period is very dependent in length of your expertise and how long you've been doing the sport. If you're new to it, that might take, more towards that 8-week length that we talked about. If you're a veteran, you've been doing it for a long time, it could be as short as just 2 weeks. Could be pretty quick. Moving on to the base period throughout the summer, our main focus the whole time is really just making sure that we're getting the mileage that we would need to be able to train appropriately. And so a lot of distance runs. Every now and then we'll sneak in like a power run or a fartlek, something a little bit faster.
That name will never
He
not
laughs
make
at
me
that
laugh.
every single time.
I am 2 years old. Yes.
I'm going to start bringing it up in like every single episode now. I'll just throw that word in there somewhere. We'll do like some short sprints after runs, and nothing really intense. It's really just a way to get the legs moving and kind of break up the monotonous movement of distance runs, being the exact same the whole time. But yeah, our focus there is definitely just on improving our body's ability to handle the workload that we're doing. And then as we move on to pre-competition phase, end of the summer, and really build into that cross-country season, we'll start doing more race-specific stuff. Cross-country is usually run on the grass, and so we'll start doing speed workouts on the grass that are interval heavy. So we'll be doing stuff at race pace with shorter amount of rest, building towards that. And then getting more towards that competition phase, that's when it gets tricky, in my opinion, because you're trying to balance, maintaining or improving your fitness with also running well in a race. And so I like to think of races as, in a way, another workout. And so if typically you're doing 2 workouts in a week, don't worry about trying to fit in that normal cycle there. You may have a race this week, and that's going to be a hard effort, and you can still get fitter from running in a race.
I like that. Say that again.
You can still get fitter from running in a race.
I like that.
And I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as your basis, but there are times, when coaches will say, we're going to race you into fitness. And that's usually, if you've been injured going into the season and for whatever reason this season, maybe it's your last season in high school or in college, or whatever it may be that have this limiting factor on there, is you don't want to miss out on that season. So we don't really have time to go through the full cycle, but we're going to kind of race you into fitness. So take a race as an opportunity to be a way to get fitter as well. So maybe you do a medium difficulty workout at the beginning of the week, and then just easy mileage all the way up till the race on the weekend. Race the race, obviously 100%, go all out, run hard, and then take that as a grain of salt as your full season. Because after every race, whether it went good or bad, you can tweak future workouts, future training cycles based off of the results you had in that race. But even in a season where we have, 10 different races, there's always kind of an end goal, and always keep that end goal in mind. So in high school, it's the state championships. In college, it's the NCAA championships, or if it's someone training for a marathon, and maybe they did a few half marathons in the build-up, it's that marathon at the end. And so always keep in mind that that's the goal, even though you do have these little cycles of intense training and tapering for races in between.
Yeah.
I like that. That's
Sorry,
really
pretty
awesome.
long-winded answer.
No,
No,
I
it was
think
a
kinda
perfect
gives-
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it was nice to have a real world example of going through each of those phases, why it's important, and how that actually looks like. Or no, how that actually looks. Oh, I hate it when people say how that looks like. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But how that looks and plays out in real life. I think that was that was awesome. So
Yeah. I like that. So maybe also not being really upset if you don't do great in one of your mini races,
Yeah.
because it's the end goal that you have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you really want to do good.
Yeah, it's common even to hear coaches say, we're going to train through this race. It's going to be used as a workout, and we're not going to be tapering for it. Maybe just the day before, run a little bit less, but more or less, our focus is on that end race, that end goal at the very end of the season.
That's awesome. And that's really good training too, I think, to push through a race even though you haven't tapered and you're still a little bit fatigued.
Yeah. I still think it's important to get races in, and whether you're focusing on them or not, because there is a little bit of a learning curve to racing and learning, how to pace yourself and how to handle yourself when things start to get hard, because you should really never be hitting that max effort in your workouts. It's just too long of a recovery process if you're going all out every single hard workout you do. You're going to be it's going to be easier to recover and avoid that overtraining syndrome if you're hitting, just below your sub max effort.
It is really different. I was just thinking about a race I did a few months ago, and I don't race a whole bunch. I feel like I'm really good at pacing myself, but all of a sudden I was in this race and I just totally forgot about pacing. Like, what is that word? And I was like, this is a race, I'm gonna go super hard, and I just went all out. It was a 4-hour race. It was like anyways, and I just totally burnt myself out, and it was a horrible race. It's like, I don't know, it just is completely different, there are just things that I forgot about. So it makes sense that you'd want to do more.
And it could be the opposite too. Like maybe you go into this indicator race. It's really just indicating what you should be doing, and you hit the pace that you've been training at, and you think you should be racing at, and you get to the end of the race, and you're like, man, like I feel like I shortchanged myself. I could have run faster than that. But thank goodness it's in your indicator race, and you're able to adapt and change things as you keep building your training plan in your periodization cycle up towards that goal, a race at the very end of the season.
Yeah, man, I love that phrase, right? Like an indicator race. I think that's like let's highlight that, right? A way to kind of check in with yourself, and then like, yeah, maybe I could have done more, but like this was an indicator race, and I got out of it what I was looking to get out of it. I think that's cool. And then one thing I wanted to point out that you both touched on, right, is that idea of learning to pace yourself and what you do when hard things come up. Is that did I capture what you said, right?
Yeah.
So like, wow, like there's a lot packed in there. That again isn't just a racing lesson, right? Is a life lesson, right? Learning to pace ourselves, and what do we do when hard things come? How do we behave? I think are really important things. One is that learning to take things as they come, and that I know in my own life, right? It's like, oh, I have this list of things to do, and I need to do this and this and this and this, right? And I get ahead of myself, and can get burnt out, right? But learning to pace myself and be like, these are the things that are important to focus on right now that I can do, and the rest, like, I don't have to do, and that's okay. And then learning, like, when setbacks come or when hard things pop up in life, like, oh, that's what this is like. Well, here's what I can do. Here's the lesson I can learn, right? Using life events as indicator races, right? For how are we doing and what can we change to better handle those things in the future. And so I just really love that for life and for race, right? Let's learn to pace ourselves, and what do we do when hard things come up?
I love that. Man.
And there's stuff that you can't really replicate in training that become those indicators and those trials that you have to overcome that are very unique to racing. Utilizing nutrition plans, I don't know, stomach issues. It's something that in a training situation, you just stop and use the bathroom. In a race, a lot of times, it's, okay, I'm going to have to suffer through this for a few miles. It's never pretty. But it ultimately,
just don't lose your shorts.
When you're talking about the top level athletes, there's a point where it's, you just got to keep going. And replicating these things in training is difficult sometimes. So I think there is a lot to be said about this competition period and having this time where you not only have your goal race, but different races and competitions that can be indicators to you of how you can adapt your training both currently and in the future to better prepare yourself.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So what do you think, like you talked about how kind of running through this schedule, right? The transition phase up into the competition phase. What would you say about that to kind of the novice athlete that's like, oh, I'm going to go out and run a marathon? Because I think like, I guess what would you say to a novice athlete to help them to like do the best for themselves and not just kind of like get overexcited and blow up, I guess.
I would say that's probably the biggest mistake of any athlete getting into something. They're always super excited about it when they start, and they jump in super fast, and then it gets really hard really fast because they jump in head first, and in reality, they're doing way too much than what they should be doing. And so this periodization cycle really allows for there to be a process of when you're adding in different things. So it's not all of a sudden like you go from being a couch potato to, okay, tomorrow I got my 10-mile run in the morning, I got lifting afterwards, and then I got my double in the afternoon, and then I got my rehab exercises after that. And it's like holy cow, like slow down. That is not only going to burn you out super fast, but like mentally that's going to be so fatiguing to be able to all of a sudden change your lifestyle that much. And so and I think that's the beauty of especially the transition phase. It's a way to prepare both mentally and physically, and work your way up into building up that correct amount of volume of work that you should be doing. And so for a novice athlete coming in, following this strategy here is going to help you be able to grow in an appropriate way and not to take some of the guessing out of it, when you should be adding in these different things. And so you can find different concrete lengths of time you should be following these different phases of training, but ultimately it's going to be something that's indicated by your body and how much time you have until your big race. And so I think it's super important for that novice athlete to be able to look into.
Yeah.
Preston, you are the periodization master. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we should probably wrap things up here. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Anything that stood out to you in the athlete stories or?
No, I mean, I just think that was a really good way to wrap it up, right?
Yeah.
In just the idea of like making sure that we take a step back and think about what we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And that, like you said, if we're smart about it, training in this way allows us to kind of take some of the guesswork out so that we can learn how to listen to our bodies and still like reach our training goals without kind of, again, running from injury to injury.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, that wraps up our episode for this week. Follow our Facebook page, Body Smart PT, or follow along on our website, bodysmartutah.com, to see what pages we're going to be doing next week. A quick shout out to our sponsors. So shout out to the Utah Running Shop. Shout out to the Oakwood to Stansbury Trail Series by Jimmy Thomas. Shout out to the Wasatch Run Club.
I love your guys' intro for that every single time. It's so enthusiastic. The Wasatch Run Club, a group that I've put together, really just a fun atmosphere for runners to come out and enjoy and get to know other runners and socialize. We have a Facebook page and group, Wasatch Run Club, website wasatchrunclub.com, and then we also meet Wednesday nights to go run together. So check it out.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys next Monday.